While France is getting even more serious to protect Ukraine, on today's meeting between Macron and Chancellor of Germany Scholz, President Macron showed this map of the northern side of Ukraine with the Russian new attack towards the Kharkiv Oblast. And he said that Russia is allowed to do everything out there on their territory to form their groups, attacking forces, so Ukraine has the right to defend itself by targeting the Russian-only military infrastructure. He says that in fact Ukraine is under attack from the bases in Russia. And we are telling them you are not allowed to use to reach those bases using the Western-made weaponry, and military sites from which Ukraine is attacked should be targeted by Ukrainian army. That is what we understand from his speech, and Chancellor Scholz was standing just near Macron at this moment. I think that it was one of the main topics of Macron's visit to Germany, and Chancellor Scholz might agree on this deal. At least I think like that, because now there are two of the main countries which are opposing the strategy. First of all, Germany, and secondly, the United States of America. First of all, the White House administration, because as we know, Congress didn't put any sort of the restrictions for using the Western-made weaponry for Ukraine. Well, I'm quite optimistic about the next step of the White House. I think that they will allow Ukraine to use weaponry to target the Russian military infrastructure. But for the Germany, well, I'm also quite optimistic. So in the nearby future, Ukraine will obtain that permission. Otherwise, we'll not be able to see all of the news about this particular topic. So for sure, media sources are spreading this information for purpose. And some of the politician leaders of our allies as well, for example, Macron. Is it a new step in the escalation of this war? Obviously it is, and Russia understands that. But Russia started to escalate at first. With their attempt to extend their territorial waters in the Baltic Sea, for example, they also put this information to their press and their controlled media that was later on taken by the Western media sources. Later on, Russian officials say that no, this information is fake. But at the same time, they removed some of the buoys from the river of Narva in Estonia, the Estonian border buoys right at the border with Russia. Also, Russia started to escalate with sabotage attacks. We have the reports about it as well. It is happening also in Europe. So I would say that it is a proper thing for Ukraine to obtain that approval to use ATACMS, for example, against only Russian military infrastructure on the Russian territory. By giving this permission, the United West not just protects Ukraine from the big Russian strikes on the northern side of Ukraine, but also it shows Russia that it is united, first of all, and is able to escalate on its side. So Russia will understand that if they continue to escalate on their side, they would have the prompt respond with the help of the Western weaponry. So it is good that we have those messages delivered by President of France, Macron. Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. At the same time, we have even more harsh rhetorics towards Russia and China from Donald Trump. At one of his meetings with donors, auditions, fundraising tours, he said that he would shell Moscow or Beijing if Russia invaded Ukraine or China invaded Taiwan if he was a president of the United States of America by that time, but actually he was. Well, Russia started its crawling occupation of Crimea back in 2014. Then Obama was in the White House, but later on Trump took his turn. So actually he was a president of the United States by the time there was the war in Ukraine already. It wasn't a big-scale war like it is happening right now, but there was some of the shooting and losses from both of the sides, also civilian losses. Well, if I was a MAGA supporter, I would say, oh, you see, Trump supports Ukraine, we should support Trump, but I understand that it is all basically nonsense. He wouldn't strike Moscow or Beijing, because by logic it leads to the Third World War. Well, Trump is greedy for power, but he is not stupid, he wouldn't start it. All of his messages are just to make the public hot, and all of those headlines, for example from the Washington Post, to appear in internet or elsewhere. It is the political nonsense, speculation or populism. That's why I personally don't believe in any word of any sort of the politician, especially politician like this one, who already told lies many of the times. Guys, just a short message: if you want to support my job that I do daily on YouTube, you might join my Patreon page. It is available in the video description just below. Thank you so much for your kind support. There was the interview with the Ukrainian Defense Minister Umerov. He gave it to Reuters, and he said that Russia prepares to send more of the soldiers, boiling the war at the highest possible point without using nukes. So now there are around 500,000 Russian soldiers on occupied Ukrainian territories, and Russia plans to send up to 300,000 soldiers more. How would they get those? Well, Russia still has volunteers, and also, as I say to you many times, they invite the soldiers from the third countries, from the poor countries, giving them quite a good allowance, so those soldiers or people, they're risking their own lives for Putin's goals in Ukraine. It's very, very stupid. So, for example, those are the new Russian soldiers fighting for the Russian army, still not running. For sure, then they arrive in the trenches, they would beg everyone around and their commanders to let them go home, but by that moment it would be too late for them. So if you look at this card, you may see that there is no any Russian ideology behind it, just money. Russia itself, outside Moscow, is also poor, so obviously they have many of the volunteers. It's all about the money, and Russian propaganda tells about it many of the times. They tell, for example, this soldier was a poor guy, he went to the war, yes, he lost his arm, but now he has a car. What a nice guy. So even without mobilization, probably they're gonna hire around 200,000 or 300,000 more soldiers, but after that, obviously, they will announce mobilization because those poor Russian men are also not infinite. But Putin is ready to play this game. He's very determined to achieve his goals of the special military operation in Ukraine. He told about it personally. Peskov, his press secretary, also told about it, that firstly they need to achieve the goals of their so-called operation, and after that they're going to negotiate about some sort of the peace in Ukraine. It is absolutely no-go scenario for Ukraine, so Ukraine needs to mobilize its resources as well. First of all, the Western-made weaponry, which is more precise than Russian and more devastating in general. The Russian propulsion now you see on the front lines is only because we have late supplies from the United States of America, because MAGA decided to block the initiative for Ukrainian support, but finally it was voted for, so we were waiting for several months and achieved the same result which should have been achieved during the autumn time last year. For what it was done, well, probably here MAGA played in favor of Russia. I don't have any other explanation. And where's the urgent border security question? Does someone speak about it? After all, well, I heard some of the news about it, but not in a panic format as it was presented before. The Ukrainian military support question was involved in that. So definitely there are some of the United States politicians who played the role of the useful fools for Russia. You might remember that several months ago Ukraine shut down Russian transport military airplane Ilyushin 76. Russia claims that there were some of the Ukrainian prisoners of war who were up to be exchanged for the Russian prisoners of war, but still that information wasn't really confirmed. Well, Ukraine used the Patriot system to shut down that particular one, and the German source published the information that after the usage of the German-supplied Patriot system, there was a big scandal between German officials and Ukraine, so Germans say that Ukraine will never obtain any sort of the missiles for those Patriot systems in case it would continue to strike Russian aviation over the Russian territory. Well, honestly, it's hard to confirm that information, especially from the Bild source, but sometimes they spread truthful information, so they rely on their own sources. But I think that this situation is apt to be changed. I'm sure that our allies will allow Ukraine to use any sort of the weaponry to target all of the Russian military bases, especially airfields, because Russia continues to use their aviation to drop the gliding bombs on Kharkiv, for example. It's impossible to shut down the gliding bombs. We need to shut down the airplanes which drop them, because gliding bomb, well, it just glides. It doesn't have the thermal trace, which usually used to unify the target and hit it with the air defense missile. And we know that Russia constantly modernizes their gliding bombs, and now they're very precise compared to what it was several months ago. It is the biggest threat for Ukraine right now from the Russian military. What else is happening? That Russia concentrates many of the forces near the northern region of Ukraine, I mean Chernihiv Oblast, Sumy Oblast, and we have some sort of the information that Russia sends their helicopters and vehicles to Belarus. More than a year ago, they removed all of their forces from Belarus because they needed them to fight on the east, and now they produce more of the weaponry and concentrate it at the current front lines and also at the possible future front lines. So the new Russian attacks absolutely could happen, and they could be even more successful compared to Russian operation in Kharkiv, for example. Then Russia wasn't really ready to strike at that particular point. I think they just used the time before Ukraine obtained the main package of the military support, so the Russian group was quite limited in their capabilities. They achieved just limited goals, and now they try to reinforce this group to move further. But for now, the front lines in Kharkiv are standstill. Ukraine is capable to stop Russia. Well, today Matthew Miller was asked a question on the conference about the United States policy on allowing or not allowing Ukraine to use the Western-made, first of all, United States weaponry against Russia on the Russian territory, and he says that they still follow the previous policy supporting Ukraine on the front lines and diplomatically in coalitions with other countries, so he avoided that question mainly, but from the leaks in the press we understand that the talks about this decision, prompt decision, are ongoing in the White House. And Ukraine, I'm sure, as I was sure about the main military support bill for Ukraine, so I'm sure here that the United States will allow Ukraine to use their ATACMS missiles on the Russian military bases. We'll not see any sort of the media reports or something like that, but we'll see many more strikes one night in many of the Russian airfields and the other military facilities. Like, for example, it happened in Luhansk yesterday, so the Russian military airfield indeed was targeted. There was the radar system, and we have the satellite images of it being hit. So it's the NEPA-U very capable system, and today we have this footage of the burned grass around yesterday and today, so the system was just buried out there. One more sign that Ukraine is getting to strike Russian bases and just gets rid of the Russian surveillance on the way to make Russia blind, to strike suddenly and very precisely. So I think that even without the permission from the United States of America, currently we don't have it, but Ukraine might strike Russian bases with the French-made Scalp cruise missiles, or also British-made Storm Shadow, because Britain also supports Ukraine in that move. It would be enough to test the Russian reaction at first. Right, today Putin made it clearly that he is not willing to negotiate with Zelensky. He said that the duties of the Ukrainian president had expired on 21st of May, so they have no one to negotiate with at the present level, but they still think that the Speaker of Parliament has the power in Ukraine, from what I understood judging on his speech. Well, it is understandable, as I said to you, Russia wants to reach their goals in Ukraine. In reality, they don't want to negotiate, but put their puppet government in Ukraine, take it fully under control. For Ukraine to be the second Belarus with just a tiny part of sovereignty, it's the Russians' long-term policy, and they use some of the gaps in Ukrainian laws to prove their point, because basically in the Ukrainian constitution, yes, there is nothing told about the extension of the presidential duties, even in case of the state of war. It is only said about Ukrainian parliament in constitution that it will continue its duties in state of war. Are the presidential elections in Ukraine are possible? Well, without the electronic voting, I think no. So it's kind of the difficult situation indeed, and Ukraine, by the way, also doesn't recognize Putin as the legitimate leader of Russia after his elections, and moreover, even before, forbidden any sort of the negotiations with Putin directly until he keeps his post of the Russian president. Meanwhile, the other countries like United States of America and many of the European Union countries recognize Putin as the Russian president, as well as Zelensky as a Ukrainian president. Just dry facts, you may judge it yourself, but what I see that Russians always use any sort of the tool to promote their interests, and their interest is to occupy Ukraine. So Ukraine should be ready for pressure not just from Russia on this diplomatic way, but also from China and maybe some of the countries on the south. Zelensky has visited our pilots on a training in Belgium. He met with them, and I don't know why, but this picture was shared in the media. Actually, there was a video. Guys were openly shown with their faces, but they were blurred before in many of the videos. So it is actually bad that unblurred images of our pilots were shared into the internet. Here I show it because it's not a secret any longer. Yeah, I know that Russian propaganda also said about it, but I think it shouldn't be done like that. because after all, the Russian intelligence has quite a long hands to reach everyone elsewhere if they really focused on that, and our F-16 pilots are a very precious resource for Ukrainian military and in general for Ukraine. Well, every life is precious, but those guys, they're professionals, and potentially they march down many of the Russian airplanes and hit many of the Russian ground targets. So Russia is really focused on them as well, so the faces should be hidden by blur or something. But here we may see the image without any sort of the censorship, which is not good. The Wall Street Journal says that Russia plans to produce around 6,000 of the Shahed drones on one of their plants in Tatarstan. By the way, this facility has already been targeted by some sort of the Ukrainian drone. The production of the drones was stopped for a while, but now totally renewed. Russia is now capable to produce around 4,000 drones per year, but now they send some of the workers from African countries to work on those facilities as well. Russia hired workforce from East Africa, Wall Street Journal says. 6,000 Shahed drones is a lot, but usually Ukraine shuts down them very successfully. Compared to ballistic missiles, let's say, or S-300, which is also the ballistic missile converted from ground-to-air into ground-to-ground missile by the Russian army. Usually Russia uses those to target Kharkiv city, and definitely those are really hard to intercept. What the hell is happening to Tucker Carlson? I mean, he's probably losing his mind. He published this picture saying that 500,000 Ukrainians dead for nothing. The United States senators continue to support Russian-Ukrainian war despite having no idea what the death toll is. Today, Tucker Carlson, joined by political expert and economics professor Jeffrey Sachs, to discuss the issues around the war, blah blah blah. Well, first of all, 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers didn't die in this war. Even 500,000 Russian soldiers didn't die. Yeah, according to Ukrainian statistics, 500,000 losses for Russia, but those are not just KIA. The wounded personnel also is included in that statistics. So we may say about 150,000 Russian soldiers who really lost their lives in this war. And because Russia is usually attacking, they have more losses compared to Ukraine. According to general statistics, it is usually 1 to 3. So if we divide 150 by 3, we'll have the number of 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers who potentially might have lost their lives because of this war. 10 times less than Tucker Carlson says in his nonsense. And all of those soldiers, they didn't die for nothing. Russia intervened into Ukraine. They started the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, so Ukraine protects itself against Russia. But it seems like Tucker Carlson, together with Elon Musk and generally MAGA group, are willing for Ukraine to be the part of Russia after all, to share the same values of dictatorship, and later on to spread them elsewhere in Europe at first and maybe even further. Also, why did Tucker Carlson choose this placard or image as the intro for his interview with someone? How is it related really, or he just afraid that Putin is under potential threat by the West? And he continued to spread the Russian nonsense and propaganda, Russian bias, and some of the conspiracy theories about CIA involvement in many of the coups taking place around the world. Well, even if we admit that it is true, those coups are not really successful. Iranian coups slowed down and vanished. The same is now happening in Georgia.
And he goes, I agree with you. Okay. I mean, but like, what is that? Why?
He's kind of a strange guy. I think he has some of the mental sickness or issues with his mentality. Well, basically his mimics and reactions are kind of strange. Even during his interview with Putin, it was visible. He's laughing as a crazy guy, not able to control his emotions. And he delivers those emotion lines towards his viewers. That's why maybe he attracts so many people who are watching him. The Tucker Carlson show is the close group of the fanatics who are not okay with the reality they're living in, but they blame not themselves for not able to achieve their goals in this life, but they blame everyone around, including the democratic forces. They build conspiracy theories out of nothing to prove their points. That is how I see it myself. I'm not a fan of Tucker Carlson, and I think that he just built his audience on these controversial issues, stepping from the side from autocracy point of view, that hard hand will change America for better or something, some bullshit like that. Oh my god, we have just received the news about the air crash of the F-35. It happened. Yeah, F-35 landing to jet crashed near Albuquerque Airport in New Mexico. According to the recent report, pilot was able to eject, but he is now injured. How serious? Yeah, they say he is seriously injured after the crash. Well, the good news is that the pilot is in hospital already and he expected to recover from his injuries. The cause of the crash is yet unknown. It is under investigation. Well, this jet is very expensive, but what is more expensive is the pilot's life, and likely he survived this crash even with injuries, but the life is the most important thing. Alright, here we have some of the good news and the bad news at the same video. This video of the Russian Lancet that was launched to target Ukrainian artillery system Bogdana in Sumy Oblast. So this is the camera view. Indeed, they hit Ukrainian unit. Fortunately, there were some of the soldiers standing nearby. I don't know their destiny. So in general, yes, this video is bad, but also it shows us that Ukraine is ready for the possible Russian intervention into the Sumy Oblast because there is a significant defense line built. At the very front line, we see the anti-tank trench, which is very deep, and later on the Dragon Ts are coming. Also, this tree line helps to defend the area. Well, maybe that is why Russia still hesitates to attack Sumy Oblast, because in that particular place Ukraine waits for them. What they can do for now is to target Ukrainian artillery, for example, in the place, and other units, which they do usually using their Lancet drones. The Ukrainian artillery losses are mostly because of the Russian Lancets. From all of the Russian drones, they are the most effective. Sweden postponed its program to deliver to Ukraine Gripen fighter jets. There were strong discussions and preparations about it, but now allies decided to focus on a single aircraft type, F-16. Well, in that case, probably Ukraine will get more F-16s. Hopefully. Right, let's check the latest update of the front lines. Enemy advanced in Umansk. Just a little. Let's go to the timeline. Yesterday, today. They're taking some of the ground in this particular area out from Avdiivka direction. In the recent 5 days, they propelled quite a lot, I would say. So they started their new offensive in Kharkiv. Ukraine was forced to send some of the reinforcements, and now Russia started to push on the east. Maybe after all it was Russians' plan, but still that advancement is not that catastrophic, and we are not speaking about the Russian main breakthrough Ukrainian defense. Right, Staromayorsk, there was also the Russian strike, and here Russia occupied the vast territory of the village before it was liberated by Ukraine, but now Russia occupies the ground again. They started their offensive around 2 months ago, and little by little they are moving forward. But again, very, very slowly, so it was their advancement for 2 months. The area of Bogdanivka has been clarified. There was no Russian advancement and just the clarification of the military map. Yesterday, today, no significant changes, but here Russia pushes towards the Chasiv Yar. In Kharkiv region, again, no any changes for today. Russia stands still there for sure, but they're collecting forces, as I say to you, so maybe they'll decide to strike again. We'll be waiting for the new updates from the Kharkiv direction. Putin again threatens with nukes the small countries of NATO. Well, he didn't say openly that we're gonna nuke you, but he said that if those small countries with high and dense population are willing to strike the Russian territory with Ukrainian hands, but with their own weaponry, they should think twice about it. We should understand that Putin says about dense population and threats from the Russian military, he means a weaponry of mass destruction, so nuclear weaponry. Don't put your nose in Ukraine, otherwise we're gonna strike you at some point. And what are the red lines? Well, they are known for us. Do not support the strikes on the Russian military bases on the Russian territory. But his rhetoric was the same back in 2022. He threatens NATO countries of being even involved into supplyment of the weaponry to Ukraine. So regularly Putin establishes his red lines, but those are usually crossed by our allies after some period of time. And now, my friends, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. And as usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.